Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Pegs, Kathy, Aaron, and Snowpea. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, music-free versions, and full books found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's celebrate a rather sparkling time of year with more from Pyrotechnics, The History and Art of Firework Making by A. St. H. Brock, ARIBA, with numerous colored and other illustrations. First published in 1922 by Daniel O'Connor, 90 Great Russell Street, WC1, London. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 7. Let's begin. Chapter 7: Firework Manufacture. The manufacture of fireworks in this country, as an industry distinct from mere firework making, dates from the early part of the 18th century. Before that period, displays appear to have been generally carried out by the military, or at any rate under the control of artillery or engineer officers. At that time, the art was considered to have two distinct branches: civil and military pyrotechny, the latter class naturally attracting most attention during a period when Europe was almost continuously at war, and when firearms had made little progress from the early types. As has been previously mentioned, Jones complains that when it was required to carry out a display of fireworks on a large scale, recourse was always had to foreigners to conduct it. One reason was that apart from the actual making of the firework units, a display depends far more for its success on the experience and skill of the pyrotechnist in arranging and composing both the form and sequence of the pieces. The firework makers capable of carrying out a display on a large scale were very few. There were fewer, if any, in this country. The whole of the trade was illegal. Under the statute of the 9th and 10th of William III, it was illegal to make or let off fireworks. Quote, "By the 9th and 10th of William, Chapter 7, it is enacted that if any person shall make or cause to be made, or sell, give, or utter, or offer, or expose to sale any squibs, rockets, serpents, or other fireworks, he shall forfeit £5, and that if any person shall permit the same to be fired from his house or premises, or shall cast or fire, or be aiding and assisting in casting or firing the same in any public street, house, shop, river, or highway, he shall forfeit 20 shillings, or be committed to the House of Correction to hard labor for 1 month." End quote. This act continued in force up to the passing of the Gunpowder Act in 1860. There were periods during which it was practically a dead letter, and again periods of sporadic activity. The first restriction of the public use of fireworks appears to have been an order in council dated November 6, 1685, which, for the preventing of tumultuous disorders, and with the object of disappointing the evil designs of persons disaffected to the government, who commonly make use of such occasions to turn those meetings into riots and tumults, enacted that no person or persons whatsoever do presume to make or encourage the making of any bonfires or other public fireworks, without particular permission, leave, and order, upon pain of His Majesty's displeasure, and being prosecuted with the utmost severity of the law. A notice appeared in the press of November 1st, 1788, dated from the public office, Bow Street, warning the public against firing crackers in the street, and quoting the act that no person may claim ignorance thereof. Again, in 1814, the Times has an account of a summons under the act of a William Swift for exposing for sale squibs, serpents, crackers, and fireworks of other descriptions, to the great danger and annoyance of the public, and contrary to the statute. The report continues, quote, "Mr. Laws, in opening the case, observed that this was a prosecution brought forward at the recommendation of the magistrates of Union Hall, who, however, did not by it seek to punish the defendant with severity, but only to inform him and others acting like him that the act upon which the present indictment was founded, and which so far back as the reign of William III was passed for the protection of the public, though it had not lately been acted upon, was still in force. The defendant, it appeared, was a man of property and a respectable holder residing in Falcon Court, where he had for some time past carried on the profession of a firework maker. The officers of Union Hall having heard, however, that he was in the habit of supplying boys or any person who applied indiscriminately with these dangerous commodities, they determined, if possible, to put a stop to this traffic, so dangerous to the public safety. For this purpose they sent a person properly instructed to purchase some, Goff, Bruce, and some other of the officers remaining near the door to detect him coming out. The purchase was made, and as the purchaser was quitting the house, the officers stopped him and forced their way in. They proceeded to search the premises, and concealed in closets and other parts, they discovered a vast quantity of fireworks of various sizes and descriptions, amounting to 19,600, and weighing upwards of 600 weight. Several of these singly were large enough to have spread ruin through the neighborhood, had they by accident exploded. These the officers took away and deposited at the office, where they still remain to the great annoyance of the magistrates, waiting the decision of this question." End quote. Hone, in his Everyday Book, records that at the time, 1825, a corporation notice was annually left at the house of every inhabitant in the City of London, previous to Lord Mayor's Day. The following, delivered in St. Bride's, is its form. October the 11th, 1825. Sir, by virtue of a precept from my Lord Mayor, in order to prevent any tumults and riots that may happen on the 5th of November, and the next ensuing Lord Mayor's Day, you are required to charge all your servants and lodgers that they neither make nor cause to be made any squibs, serpents, fire balloons, or other fireworks, nor fire, fling, nor throw them out of your house, shop, or warehouse, or in the streets of this city, on the penalties contained in an Act of Parliament made in the 10th year of the late King William. Note: the Act was made perpetual and is not expired, as some ignorantly suppose. C. Puckeridge, Beadle, Tailor, Printer, Basinghall Street. During the period of the operation of the Act, that is, from the end of the 17th to the middle of the 19th centuries, on the occasion of public rejoicing, the authorities were in the anomalous position of employing persons to break the law, both by manufacturing and displaying fireworks. Although, as we have seen, this act had very little effect on the quantity of fireworks manufactured, it had considerable adverse effect on the industry. As the whole thing was illegal, no regulations were framed to control the making, storage, or distribution of fireworks, or the safety of either workers or public. The manufacture was conducted on lines which at the present time appear inconceivably reckless. Several people working in one room in a crowded building, with loose composition and gunpowder, and a fire in an open grate round which finished or partially finished goods were put to dry, and this in a thickly populated area of London. The result of this state of affairs, as might have been expected, was a continuous series of explosions of a more or less serious nature. An early press account dated 1722 relates to Mr. Goodship of White Alley in Chancery Lane, and continues, as he was making some fireworks, the gunpowder took fire and blew him up, by which means the house was fired, and that adjoining somewhat damaged. More mischief had been done, but that there was timely help. The man is so hurt that his life is despaired of. Another account gives the man's name as Goodsheaf. The early part of the 19th century provided an extraordinary list of accidents. In 1810, we find the following account of an accident at Bath. On Monday, a dreadful accident happened at Bath to Mrs. Invetto, a firework maker, and a young man, her assistant. They were preparing skyrockets, etc., for the Jubilee, when by some means an explosion took place of a considerable quantity of powder, some say upwards of 200 barrels, which blew the house and another adjoining to atoms. In 1814, 2 accidents are recorded to Mortram and Clitheroe. The former took place in the Westminster Road near the asylum. Clitheroe's establishment was situated in Fleet Street Hill, Bethnal Green. The accident here was caused by fire from the steam engine reaching some fireworks. 3 people were badly injured, and much glass was destroyed in the neighborhood. Clitheroe appears to have had his work separate from the dwelling house, an arrangement which appears to be the exception rather than the rule. Mortram's premises were again destroyed in 1818, fortunately without loss of life. A serious accident took place in 1815, in which 5 people lost their lives, the premises and those on either side being demolished, and nearly all windows destroyed within 200 yards. The proprietor of the premises, which were situated at Wilk Street, Spitalfields, was Luchelin. In 1821, a 3rd accident occurred at Mortram's Works, the newspaper account of which gives an illuminating glimpse of the extraordinary methods of the period. Quote, Tuesday morning, an accident, which occasioned considerable alarm and might have been attended with dangerous consequences, took place in the house of Mr. Mortram, firework maker, in Westminster Road. It appears that one of the boys employed in making composition stars for rockets had placed a number of them on the fender before the fire to dry, and had set fire to one on the hob, which falling in amongst the others, the whole exploded. The boy escaped up the area with his jacket on fire. The neighbors were now much alarmed, fearing that the fire might spread to more combustible matter in the house, and so on to the extensive workshops of Madame Hengler, the celebrated pyrotechnic to His Majesty. But through the activity of the workmen, who ran into the adjoining house with buckets of water, further damage was happily prevented, or the consequences might have been dreadful. An accident of a shocking nature, it will be recollected, occurred about 3 years since in the same person's repository, when 2 men were killed by the explosion." End quote. In 1825, in Bell's Weekly Messenger of September 4th, appears the following account. Quote, "Dreadful explosion in Whitechapel. Yesterday morning, about 8:30 o'clock, Whitechapel Road and the numerous streets that abound there were thrown into the greatest state of agitation by the inhabitants experiencing a most tremendous shock, as if caused by a volcano or an earthquake. The houses for a considerable distance were deserted by their inhabitants, and men, women, and children were seen running about in all directions, under the impression that the world was at an end. It was soon ascertained that their alarm was produced by the explosion of the factory of Mr. Brock, the artist in fireworks, at number 11 Baker's Row, Whitechapel Road, nearly opposite the London Hospital. The following particulars relative to this direful disaster have reached us. Mr. Brock has resided for the last 5 years in Baker's Row, and at the back of his dwelling house is his repository for fireworks, where they are manufactured. This building is about 50 feet by 20 feet and contains 3 magazines which are lined with lead, and would be perfectly secure from fire should it occur on any of the adjoining premises. In these receptacles were deposited all the powder, composition, and in fact all the combustible matter, and Mr. Brock was remarkable for the method he had taken to prevent any accident occurring on his premises. A few weeks since he had taken 2 boys out of the poorhouse to instruct in the art of firework making, and he kept them chiefly employed in filling and ramming the cases of the skyrockets, serpents, squibs, etc. The latter part of this stage of the work is done by a funnel, or piece of tin made in the shape of an extinguisher, and a small piece of iron wire about 1 foot long, which is used as a ramrod. The small end, or nipple as it is called, of the extinguisher is introduced into one end of the rocket or squib, and the boys ram the powder and wadding down with the ramrod. Yesterday morning, at the time above stated, Mr. Brock and his men left the factory to go to breakfast, leaving the 2 boys engaged at the work-board ramming the skyrockets. They had scarcely sat down to their meal when they, as well as the inhabitants around them for some distance, heard a sort of rumbling noise as if of some distant thunder. And the next moment a tremendous and deafening explosion followed, and the air was illumined with lights of various descriptions and accompanied by continued reports. The concussion thus occasioned was so great that the inmates in the different houses were shaken from their seats, many of whom were sitting at their breakfast, and the tables and tea things were upset and broken to pieces, The window frames were all forced out, and the brickbats and materials were flying about in every direction. The roofs of Mr. Brock's manufactory and the factory of Mr. Medevit adjoining were blown to a considerable height, and the falling materials did considerable mischief. After the agitation was somewhat subsided, an inquiry into the cause of the accident took place, when it appeared from the statement of the two boys, who were blown a considerable height and were much injured, that they were at work ramming the rockets, when the ramrod struck against the funnel, and the friction caused a spark, which flew into the bowl of gunpowder that stood near them. This soon exploded and ran like a train to all the other fireworks in the factory, and at length communicated to the magazines which caused the disaster. Mr. Brock, however, declares that it could not have arisen in that way, as the nipple of the funnel was copper, therefore a friction would not cause a spark. One poor woman, sister to the beadle, who lives next door to Mr. Brock, was so dreadfully injured by the broken glass that she lies in the London hospital without hopes of recovery. 10 houses were seriously damaged, and over 60 had their windows broken from top to bottom." End quote. It will be seen from the foregoing that Brock was in advance of his time as regards precautions against explosions, which, however, in this case proved to some extent ineffective. An accident took place in 1838 at the premises of Cockrell in Paradise Row, Lower Road, Islington. 3 persons were killed, and the proprietor was so severely hurt in an attempt to rescue his family that he later died. The following year, an accident took place at 6 Edward Street, Bethnal Green, in which 3 persons were injured. The explosion was caused by a spark from the fire falling on a quantity of loose powder lying on the table, the flash from which was communicated to a barrel of powder near. The report continues, "The most miserable negligence was displayed by the persons engaged in the fabrication of the fireworks, as just previous to the accident, one of the individuals was making a squib by the fire with a lighted pipe in his mouth. The pyrotechnist's name is not recorded." An explosion took place in 1841 at 6 Hatfield Place, Westminster Road, Lambeth, at the works of Druitt. Considerable damage was done, but fortunately no one was injured. In 1857, Darby's factory at 98 Regent Street, Lambeth Walk, was destroyed. The upper part of the house was used as bedrooms with the stock below. The whole of the premises and stock were destroyed, the occupants of the bedrooms who were cut off being rescued by the aid of ladders. On this occasion, the gunpowder appears to have been stored in a magazine away from the house. The report adds that the same premises had suffered in a similar manner on 1 or 2 previous occasions, and subsequently in November 1873, a disastrous explosion at the same premises resulted in the loss of no fewer than 8 lives. In 1858, a serious explosion took place at Madame Cotton's factory in the Westminster Bridge Road. The above-mentioned accidents do not comprise anything like a complete list, but tend to show the lines on which the manufacture of fireworks was conducted during the period covered. The frequency of such occurrences and the danger entailed to third parties pointed to the necessity of action of some kind. The old act might have been put into force, but by so doing the industry would be stamped out, an industry which found employment for a large number of work people, and besides giving amusement and entertainment to many, provided signal lights and rockets, the demand for which was steadily increasing. There were at this time a considerable number of firework makers in London, particularly in the east and south of the Thames. Much of the work was given out to the work people's families to make up in their own homes. Workmen now living can remember as children seeing crackers, squibs, and other small goods being manufactured in bed and living rooms of tenement houses in crowded districts, with open fires in the grates and several pounds of powder in a corner of the room. The materials were either given out at the factory and a piecework rate paid for making up, or the workers bought their own materials at the local shops, which in these districts kept what was required and sold them to the factory on completion. It was then a common practice for a maker who had completed a frame of quick match to take it round to the local bakehouse to be dried and called for in the morning. Considered from the point of view of modern practice, the wonder is that there were not more accidents than actually took place. The Gunpowder Act of 1860 was an attempt to place the manufacture and storage of explosives generally on a more satisfactory footing. It laid down regulations to be observed with regard to the manufacture of loaded percussion caps and the manufacture and keeping of ammunition, fireworks, fulminate of mercury, and any other preparation or composition of an explosive nature, and makes it lawful for justices of the peace in quarter sessions to license places for the manufacture and storage of such articles, and to grant licenses to persons to sell fireworks. It also provided for the installation of lightning conductors in explosive magazines. This act, although far from perfect, was a step in the right direction. It had the effect of bringing some makers out from the back streets of crowded districts to construct properly arranged factories, or at any rate, factories planned with some regard to their use. 4 years after the passing of the act, public attention was sharply drawn to the matter by an explosion on an unprecedented scale at Erith, where several of the gunpowder manufacturers had magazines. Enormous damage was done and many lives lost over an area 10 miles in radius. Lieutenant Colonel Boxer, R.A., Superintendent of the Royal Laboratory, Woolwich, in his report on this explosion, draws attention to the need for a system of inspection of explosive establishments, with the result that he was himself authorized to make such inspection. Lieutenant Colonel Boxer was succeeded in 1870 by Captain, afterwards Colonel, Sir V. D. Magendie, K.C.B., who recommended the appointment of permanent explosives inspectors. The late C.T. Brock, who commenced the long run of Crystal Palace displays in 1866, found his works insufficient for the large supply of material required for such displays, and commenced the construction of a factory on new lines at Nunhead. It was here in 1872 that the Royal Commission witnessed a series of experiments, the program of which is here reproduced. It was upon the results of these experiments that the provisions of the Explosives Act of 1875, insofar as they relate to fireworks, are based. This act is still in force and is unlikely to be superseded for many years to come. There can have been few acts which have, since their inception, proved so satisfactory to the industry controlled by them either in the results achieved or in the manner of their administration. The Explosives Acts of 1860 and 1875 took the then prescribed art of pyrotechny from back streets and crowded districts, rehoused it in properly designed and conducted factories in rural or suburban districts, making it as healthy and safe an occupation as almost any in the country. Experiments with fireworks at Nunhead, in a field near Messrs. C.T. Brock & Co.'s Firework Manufactory, on Thursday, April 4th, 1872. The objects of the experiments are: 1. To determine if the distance between firework sheds, as at present laid down by law, viz. 20 yards, is amply sufficient to prevent an explosion in one shed, communicating to other sheds situated at the statutory distance. 2. To determine the liability of fireworks to ignite by concussion or friction. 3. To determine the liability of fireworks to explode en masse if from any cause they should be accidentally ignited. 4. In the event of fireworks exhibiting a liability to explode, to determine the area of destructive effect of such explosion. 5. To determine, with reference to the conclusions which may be arrived at as to points 3 and 4, the degree of danger which attends the transport of fireworks by rail, barge, or other public conveyance. 6. To determine at what distance from dwelling houses stores of fireworks may be safely established. Program of experiments. 1. Explode 30 pounds of loose firework composition in a shed, another shed being 10 yards distant, screen between. 2. Explode 30 pounds of composition in fireworks in a shed, another shed being 10 yards distant, screen between. 3. Ignite a box of 1/4 hundredweight of mixed ordinary fireworks in open air. 4. Ignite a box of 1/4 hundredweight of mixed ordinary fireworks in open air in contact with another box of same. 5. Place a box of 1/4 hundredweight of mixed ordinary fireworks in a bonfire. 6. Number 3 repeated, with mixed fireworks bought over the counter. 7. Number 4 repeated, with mixed fireworks bought over the counter. 8. Number 5 repeated, with mixed fireworks bought over the counter. 9. Hammer various sorts of fireworks, wood on wood. 10. Hammer various sorts of fireworks, wood on iron. 11. Hammer various sorts of fireworks, iron on iron. 12. Run a railway truck over some of the different sorts. 13. Repeat such of above as may seem necessary with parlor fireworks. V.D. Magendie, Captain R.A., His Majesty's Inspector of Gunpowder Works, etc. Chapter 8. Modern Firework Manufacture. Fireworks are now manufactured under the Explosives Act of 1875 and Orders in Council No. 2 and No. 4 under that Act. Order in Council No. 4 deals with small firework factories, the total contents of which, either finished or in course of construction, do not exceed 500 pounds. This class of factory presents little of interest for consideration and is governed by practically the same rules as are the larger establishments of the kind, with such modifications as are justified by the small quantity of explosive material involved. Order in Council Number 2 sets out the general rules to be observed in factories licensed under the Act, the leading points of which are as follows. The absence of iron or steel in any workshop, carriage, or boat. Cleanliness and absence of grit. Care as to material liable to spontaneous ignition. Provision of lightning conductors on magazines. Tools and implements to be of soft metal. Working clothes without pockets. Shoes without nails. Searching or means to prevent the introduction of matches or dangerous substances into the works. Materials and finished work to be removed from working buildings and not allowed to accumulate when any particular process is completed. No person under 16 years to be employed or enter any danger building. Every building to be provided with a set of these rules and a statement of the quantities of explosives and ingredients, and the work to be carried on in it as allowed by the license. The modern factory is generally situated in a rural district, on account of the fact that it is more easy to observe the statutory distances from protected works. Protected works referred to in the Act include other workshops and magazines in the factory, and also dwelling houses, factories, institutions, railways, highways, and various undertakings and buildings, the distances to be observed varying with the nature of the protected work from public highways to palaces or houses of residence of the king, his heirs, and successors. In some cases, as with private dwelling houses, the distance to be observed is about half, if the consent of the occupier to the erection of the factory building or magazine is obtained. Firework factories, in fact all explosive factories, are constructed on the principle of limiting the scope and effect of any explosion that may take place to the smallest possible quantity of material and to the smallest possible risk to human life. The working buildings are constructed with a door at either end to facilitate escape in case of danger. The quantity of chemicals and of partially or wholly finished fireworks is strictly limited, as is the number of persons employed in the building. This number varies with the nature of the operation being carried out, from 1 in the case of the most hazardous to 6 in some cases. The working buildings are of light construction. The form most in use is a timber framing lined with matched boarding and covered externally with corrugated iron. No iron fittings are used or iron nails left exposed in the interior. The floor is covered with linoleum, which is secured by copper tacks. The distance separating working buildings is generally speaking 25 yards, or if a suitable screen is placed between 2 such buildings, this distance may be reduced to 12 yards. The work people are provided with non-inflammable outer garments. No pockets are allowed, and suitable overshoes of sewn leather or India rubber are provided. All tools are of soft metal such as brass or copper, or of wood. The regulations refer, of course, only to those buildings in which explosive work is carried on, that is to say, buildings in the danger area as distinct from the non-danger area. The buildings in the danger area are working buildings, drying rooms, expense, and factory magazines. Expense magazines are those which are licensed for a comparatively small quantity of explosives, and from which explosive material is drawn as the work of the factory demands, or into which is put partially or wholly finished work, either awaiting completion or transference to the main or factory magazines. The non-danger area includes stores for chemicals, paper, and other material. Also case rolling and drying sheds, sawmill, woodworking and paper cutting shops, offices, and similar buildings. The manufacture of fireworks begins with the making of the case or container, which, with the exception of shells and jacks in the box, are cylindrical in form. What are known as small goods are dry rolled, that is, the outer edge of the paper only is pasted. They are then rolled up on a metal former on a slate slab. The larger cases, such as rockets, gerbes, and Roman candles, have the paper pasted all over, which is rolled up on the former and consolidated by repeated rolling between the slate slab and a board provided with a handle. There are two methods of introducing the composition into the cases: filling and charging. Filling is used where the composition does not have to be consolidated and is done with a wire and funnel, or as it was formerly called, a tun dish. The funnel has its outlet of such a size as to fit the case to be filled. The wire or rod is somewhat smaller than this outlet and is provided at the upper end with a knob for the hand. The end of the funnel, which is filled with composition, is inserted in the upright case. The wire is then drawn up, thus freeing a small quantity of the composition, which runs down into the case, the lowering of the wire pushing it into position. In order to render the downward movement more effective, the wire is often notched, but it is doubtful if this actually increases the efficiency. This action is rapidly repeated until the case is filled. This method, although simple, is very effective, and in the hands of a practiced worker is exceedingly quick. Charging is adopted where the contents have to be solidified in the case. The composition is introduced in small quantities with a scoop of suitable size and consolidated by repeated blows with a wooden mallet on a drift. The drift is a cylindrical wooden tool of a size to fit the case and an enlargement at the upper end to receive the blow of the mallet. The methods of charging the various forms of fireworks will be dealt with later under their separate headings. The method of charging rockets in use in the 16th century are those of today, and it is remarkable that no satisfactory alternative to hand charging has yet been devised. Mechanical hammering and hydraulic pressure have both been tried, but so far with limited success. Stars, which are used in Roman candles and as garniture for rockets and shells, are of many kinds and combinations. But with the exception of some which are in effect complete miniature fireworks, they are constructed on one of three methods. They are either pumped, pinched, or charged. The pump used in the first of these operations consists of a short metal tube, which fits exactly a short metal plunger, provided with a knob for the hand and a small metal stud at the side. The tube has a slot cut partially down the side to receive this stud. The method of using the pump is as follows. The plunger is drawn up so that the stud rests on the top of the tube, the pump is pressed into a heap of prepared composition, which action has the effect of compressing the composition in the tube. The plunger is then turned so that the stud engages with the slot and pushed down, forcing the star out of the tube. The composition is prepared for pumping by being damped with methylated spirit or some other suitable solvent. And after making, the stars are dried in specially constructed buildings. Pinched stars are made by pinching the damped composition into a short paper case through which a short length of match is first passed. Charged stars have generally a clay or cardboard bottom to the case and are usually matched. This form is generally used for government signal rockets. As the composition being only at one end of the case, the time of burning is extended. The mixing of compositions requires great care and thoroughness. Care both on account of the necessity of exact adherence to the formula and to preclude the presence of any foreign body or chemical which, apart from any effect it might have on the successful functioning of the fireworks for which it happens to be used, might render it most dangerous in manipulation. Generally, working buildings are licensed for mixing compositions, but it is usual to set certain sheds apart for this purpose, especially if the chemicals used are of a dusty nature, that is, very finely divided, in which case the atmosphere becomes highly charged and dangerous. Chlorate of potash, from the introduction of which into pyrotechny modern effects and colors may be said to date, has at the same time been responsible for many accidents. As will be seen in the later chapters on firework compositions, for many years chlorate of potash and sulfur were used freely in the same mixtures, and many as were the accidents caused by so doing, yet it is incredible that they were not far more numerous. Most makers were well aware of the dangerous nature of this admixture, but persisted in using it, as the colors so obtained were at that time unapproached by other means. Naturally, no manufacturer wished to be alone in the discontinuance of some of the most striking effects at the time available, or to give competition the consequent advantage. In August 1893, a man was fatally burned while simply emptying a small quantity of crimson stars from one tray to another. The slight friction so caused was sufficient to ignite the stars and thus fire the whole contents of the building. This unfortunate accident took place at the works of C.T. Brock & Co., then at South Norwood, and seems even more unfortunate when one learns that with the exception of this particular crimson, they had practically eliminated chlorate and sulfur colors. The following year, by ordering Council No. 15, the admixture of chlorate of potash and sulfur was made illegal. Previous to this accident, during the same year and in the same works, a serious accident involving the death of one workman and the injury of another was caused by a barrel of chlorate of potash being delivered and marked nitrate of potash, saltpeter. Its use in a composition containing sulfide of arsenic, orpiment, produced a mixture approximate to that used in some fog signals and designed to fire by percussion. The natural effect was the serious explosion that followed. The late Sir Vivian D. Magendie, KCB, the then Chief Inspector of Explosives, records in his report that Messrs. Brock are extremely careful to keep chlorate and non-chlorate mixing departments, and even ingredients, in separate buildings and under separate control. and while he considered that some measure of blame is attributable to them in respect of the defects of their system, which rendered possible the presence of a cask of chlorate of potash as saltpeter in the saltpeter shed, he adds, "It is only fair and proper that I should say that our experience of the manner in which Messrs. Brock conduct their large business generally is extremely satisfactory. This factory is in many respects a model. They have always shown themselves ready to discuss with us and adopt any suggestion tending to increase the safety of the workpeople. These indications, if such were needed apart from the official prohibition of the use of these two ingredients together, convinced Mr. Arthur Brock that even greater care was necessary in dealing with them. With this object in view, when the works were removed to Sutton, Surrey, the two factories at South Norwood and Haroldwood, Essex, being inadequate to deal with the business, the plan of the new factory was arranged so as entirely to separate that portion of the factory using chlorate of potash from the portion using sulfur. A road running up the factory from the entrance gate divides it into what are virtually two factories, known as the color and bright sides. These works, which are easily the largest of the kind in the world, cover an area of nearly 200 acres. They include about 60 magazines, expense magazines, and drying rooms, with a total storage capacity of 1,300,000 pounds of fireworks and 5 tons of gunpowder, 120 explosive working buildings, mostly double, besides numerous stores, non-explosive working buildings, sawmills, and woodworking shops. The buildings are connected by over 4 miles of tram lines. The average number of employees is 150 men and 200 women. During the late war, this number was increased to over 2,000 on the manufacture of munitions. And with the end of Chapter 8 and that description of a remarkable facility, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Pyrotechnics, The History and Art of Firework Making. I confess that families making fireworks round the kitchen table as piecework is a rather surprising image, but the 19th century was full of most interesting employments. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.